Hey guys, how you doing? It's Joe and Jesse here from Impala Search. As you know, we've been running the Impala Invites podcast over the past couple of weeks. Today, Impala are inviting Adriana Herduk, Strategic Acquisition Manager at Cavalry Ventures. Adriana, over to you.
Hi, Joe and Jesse. Thank you very much for the invite.
No problem.
This is this is Adriana Herduk. I'm a strategic talent acquisition manager at Cavalry Ventures, and I'm happy to be here today to share some of my experiences over the past 6 and a bit years in talent acquisition in different size companies.
Thanks for the intro, Adriana. I think we were just discussing before we jumped on the podcast some areas around sort of roadmaps and hiring for different businesses. I guess it'd be good to get your take on how to create a hiring roadmap for business, and in turn how to then sell this to the management.
Mm-hmm. So I think, hiring roadmap is definitely super important and is not something that comes from the talent acquisition team, but it's something that should come from the management team.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, talent acquisition should be there to support in order to basically come up with realistic deadlines.
Mm-hmm.
But it should definitely be defined by the management team based on obviously the business needs and decisions that will happen next year.
Yeah. What would you say the core things to consider within a hiring roadmap would be?
So first of all, really assess what you need, come up with realistic numbers, and then make sure that all teams are informed about the potential hires. Come up with job descriptions that have to go out fast. And make sure that you basically stay on track for the quarterly hiring.
Great. And in terms of, obviously, you've worked at a variety of different companies, including sort of HelloFresh, Bubble, and Clue that are slightly smaller. What would you say the sort of main differences are between these sizes of companies?
Well, there's quite a bit of differences, I have to admit. So with Bubble, it was more like a steady growth, and then we kind of had it was a bit of back and forth with the management team, but it was really manageable in terms of chatting with them on what is realistic and what is not in terms of new hires. When it comes to HelloFresh, it was more here is the roadmap, just do it. There's not really actually discuss it, and also they couldn't really come up with a real roadmap for the next 12 months, being a hyper growth business. So we just basically had to go with the flow, and it was a complete difference. Completely different at Clue, actually, because it was a small team that was having a very slow growth. It's a team that basically assessing every single hire that they will do, if it's really needed or not. Hence, it was super easy to actually define a hiring roadmap with them.
Okay, this is pretty cool. So if we go back to HelloFresh then, and I suppose there's probably a few people from hypergrowth companies that are listening in, how do you keep that, I suppose, internal process consistent when, as you mentioned, it's very hard to define a clear roadmap?
I think that is
question, maybe.
that's definitely very difficult, because hypergrowth is, as I said earlier, you just have to go with the flow, right? At the time when I was in HelloFresh, we were just 4 people in the talent acquisition team, and I think we basically had to work a lot with the hiring managers and with engineering managers to keep the process going. And what we have learned was to basically train more and more people to do these interviews. Again, we had to focus on how to onboard them and so on and so forth. So it was just basically, as I said, going with the flow and learning on the go, but you just have to always keep improving.
Yeah, definitely. And in terms of, obviously, not much planning you can do for a company when it's in that hyper growth stage. But what advice would you give to any other internal recruiters that are at a company that's growing as rapidly as HelloFresh was when you were there?
Mm-hmm. I think it's basically pushing the management
Mm-hmm.
because they really need to understand what are what they're requesting from you, and then you need to make them understand that what you can achieve as a team and what you
Mm-hmm.
have to do in order to set up like realistic goals and obviously resources to back that up.
Yeah. Okay. Well, one thing that I'd like to touch on, so you mentioned obviously pushing that management. How do you, I suppose, push the management, but then also maintain that relationship that they're on side? So how do you push without being too pushy? Or are they tricks of the trade?
Wow, that's um it's a difficult question to answer, right?
Yeah.
I think it's also a matter of like understanding the team you work with, right, and see like how much you can push. But I think like if you cannot hire, then they will understand that there is a
Mm-hmm.
problem, and then they will have to spend some time with you to review what's not working and why it's not working, right? So.
Yeah.
In the end, if they don't listen to you, then things will be delayed like crazy. So I'm sure that they will like to hear you.
Definitely. You mentioned that then like obstacles and delays. One thing I'd like to touch on what you mentioned a second ago, actually, Adriana, was I suppose like getting your job adverts out. I suppose this is something that potentially people take for granted and it's just something that you put together. What would you say defines a good job advert that's going to get the right people on board?
Mm-hmm. So I think a job ad definitely has to come from like or like a good one has to be linked to the job responsibilities, right? So first of all, I would suggest people to define the job responsibility as much as they can, of course, because it really depends on the time that you have and how much you or like how fast you're growing. But then try to basically try to keep it short. Try to focus on like a couple of main requirements, because obviously in the end, if you add 100, it's going to be impossible for you to hire someone, of course, and it's going to be even harder for the team that is hiring to assess one candidate. So I would say keep it short and sweet.
Perfect. And what would you say that like candidates are looking for? What would you say their sort of main points when they are looking for a new job? What are their key areas of interest, and how do you sort of highlight this to them?
Oh. I think this differs a lot again
Yeah.
from role to role.
Yeah.
And let's say if you speak engineering, I guess
Mm-hmm.
that engineers are mostly looking for new challenges,
Mm-hmm.
looking for maybe a team where they will have access to let's say newer technologies,
Mm-hmm.
or they have the chance to at least learn something new.
Yeah.
So focus on that as well, development and the technical challenges that they might face.
No worries. No, this sounds great, Adriana. And in terms of, I guess we obviously touched base on sort of HelloFresh and your time at Bubble. But I guess it'd be good to get a bit more insight into your experience, more early stage companies. So yeah, what are your sort of plans to create a defined strategy at Cavalry Ventures?
Mm-hmm. So at Cavalry Ventures, actually, obviously, I have joined as a strategic talent acquisition manager, which means that I'm here to
Mm-hmm.
to help our portfolio companies on like
Mm-hmm.
HR processes and
Mm-hmm.
help them become more like, of course, more efficient and understand what it means to work with people from an early stage. And At the moment, I'm still like working on defining the right strategy because this is also like a brand new role here, and
Mm-hmm.
still a work in progress at the moment. But it's very different, right? Because we have companies that are, let's say, 3 to 4 people, just the founding team, and companies that already reached the stage of having 100+ employees. So it differs quite a bit.
Which is probably difficult for you, isn't it, as well? Managing, I suppose, the different size companies, which brings up, I suppose, we kind of brush past clue there a second. What was, I suppose, the the main differences from working at, I suppose, these larger companies, so HelloFresh and Babbel, then you went to Clue. What was the main differences there?
Wow, I have to admit, I was like an initial huge shock. Um, so I went to Clue from HelloFresh. So HelloFresh was hyper growth. Clue was like a super like steady, slow growth. And it took me about like I think 3 months to kind of adjust to the speed.
Okay.
Working.
So putting your feet up, having a coffee, relaxing.
Exactly, it was like crazy. Like coming from I don't know 5 to 7 interviews a day to just doing like 2 a day or something was just a huge shock for me, and then was a huge shock also on like how the management team approached hiring. It was super important for them, and they only wanted to hire quality candidates. But then also, as I said, they wanted to hire only when they need it. So it wasn't like, oh, let's just hire 100 people now. I'm just saying a number, because we need to move fast. It was more like, let's assess what we have and then hire. And then the basically the hiring roadmap was much better because we really focused on finding those right people that will also stay with us. They had a bigger interest also in the product and the mission of the company than just doing the actual work.
With the pace at Clue being slower, though, do you not feel like you missed out on, I suppose, good candidates to potentially businesses like HelloFresh that are, I suppose, moving that little bit quicker?
So no, I don't think so.
Very certain. No.
I guess it was just a bit different, right? So we were moving slower in terms of like taking the decision on what role to hire, but then when we were doing the actual hiring, it was a very smooth and fast process. So I would say that hiring them, it was fast, and we didn't. I like to believe that we didn't miss on any candidate.
Okay. But then you suppose you're not going to know that if a candidate saying we missed out. There we go. So what you're saying there is quite interesting. So although the internal process was a little bit slower, the actual hiring became quicker because of that, because the process was more thought out.
Yes.
So what made that process better? Obviously, you said it was better because people were consulting a lot more. But what key factors made that process better, would you say?
Well, I did work a lot with the hiring managers. So when I joined Clue, it was a bit of a mess because the team was slowly growing. They didn't really had like HR focused on that. So I did work a lot with the hiring manager to get them involved as much as possible in the process. And then we worked a lot with feedback, right? Let's work with feedback, and we improved basically at every single stage. We kept improving, and I was getting feedback also from the hiring managers and from the interviewing team, plus the candidates. So I think it was more like you have to focus not only internally but also externally. And also, I try to always keep training people on how to run interviews, how to behave in interviews, and so on and so forth. So, I think that's something that helped me quite a bit.
Definitely.
And obviously, at a company like Clue, where maybe it's not growing as rapidly, you do have time to invest a bit more in those processes and in training and interviews. What would your tips or advice be here? How did you go about this when you're at Clue?
Can you repeat the question?
No, like obviously at Clue you have sort of slightly more you had more time to invest in the process and improve it. What would your sort of advice be here? How did you guys go about it when you were at Clue?
So, I mean, I was really close to them. We also made like mistakes in like let's say process, but then you just you listen to the right. I mean, there's not much that I can say. Just try to basically involve introduce this mentality of hiring. You're hiring people, not numbers. So I think if you do that, then you will get to like real results and adequate results. That's my opinion.
I think on that then, learning from those mistakes probably brings us on to Cavalry. Like you say, you've just started there. I suppose your job right now is to manage several companies owned or I suppose invested in by Cavalry. What are your plans to create a defined strategy there? Because I suppose it's not going to be a one size fits all, is it really? So what are the plans to, I suppose, create and grow that?
Yeah, I think that's also one of the reasons why I joined Cavalry, right? Is because I have the chance to work with founders at an early stage or later stage, of course, and help them understand some topics in order not to make the same mistakes as I have seen or as I have done. But as again, like I would work with them more like on, let's say, a kind of consulted basis. I'm not really doing the actual work. I'm just there to help and guide them through the process.
I think your challenges are going to be different. Co-founders are going to be more open to change than others. So I think good luck to you on that one, Adriana. It's going to be fun, but also interesting. I think something that you've mentioned it quite a few times is this interview process and making sure that the interviews go right. So again, if you could just give us an overview from your experiences, what defines a good interview process?
Mm-hmm. So, of course, this depends on the role. There's roles where you can keep it short and sweet. Some roles where you probably need to spend some time. It depends, right, on the seniority of the role and so on and so forth. But like you have to keep in mind that no matter how many stages you have, you will never be able to assess a candidate at its full potential. So just, as I said earlier, try to focus on just specific points, the most critical for you, I would say, and then take the decision.
That makes sense. So it's I suppose evaluating each position, creating a process around that. So working backwards essentially to go forwards. I suppose one thing that I suppose me and Jesse actually spoke about quite a bit in the past is during interview processes, specifically I suppose within tech, but I imagine it's like this within HR in terms of what actually works and what doesn't. So I know in tech right now there's a lot of coding challenges. In HR there might be presentations and things to go with. What do you think works and what doesn't work in the interview process?
Again, it depends on the role. But let's say engineering, I would say, or at least my experience is that what works best is actually having, if you really want to introduce an assignment, it should be an offline assignment, and then have the chance to discuss with the candidate based on the results. But I wouldn't do, for example, a live coding challenge because, I think it's really like, I mean, no matter how good you are, sometimes you still have like, I don't know, you're stressed about being in an interview or not. A
bit like us in this podcast.
Yeah, so I think it really depends, but I would try not to keep, I would try not to take too much time of the candidates' time. So the assignments, even if it's an offline assignment, I would try not to make it longer than 2 to 4 hours. And then for other roles, you can ask them to prepare a presentation at home. For example, I don't know if it's a brand manager, right? Just prep something at home, a presentation, present it in front of like the interviewing team, and then have one-on-ones with questions related to that presentation to basically understand their mentality better. So that's what I did before. It worked really, really well. I think also giving them time to prepare for the interview is actually it's key to actually assessing candidates better.
Yeah, I think another sort of interesting point was you mentioned sort of coding challenges and assignments. When you're defining these, how do you sort of deal with the hiring managers or the people in the engineering team when you're putting these together? Because I know personally that a lot of candidates can find it frustrating to have to do very extensive coding challenges and just simply don't have the time. Have you had to manage this at all in your career so far with various hiring managers, Adriana?
Yes, I mean, definitely had hiring managers that wanted to have like gigantic assignments.
Yeah.
But then, it's like is not realistic. And in the end, like if a candidate applies to your job, job, then they might apply to another, like, I don't know, 5 or 6 of them, right?
Yeah, exactly.
They shouldn't spend like 2 days working on each assignment. But I think it's a matter of like working as like, again, working with the hiring manager, try to make them understand. Um, they can also assess someone with just a shorter assignment, especially if it's a senior role, right? It's just a matter of like trying to understand: do we have a similar mentality? Is it something that we can work on? Similar approach, right? You don't need to understand basically everything. As I said before, you cannot assess someone anyways in just a round of interviews. Yeah, just it's difficult, right? Especially when it's stubborn hiring.
I don't know what you're talking about, Adriana.
You just and I guess in terms of going just beyond the interview process, once you've obviously got a candidate to join the company, what would you say sort of makes a good onboarding process?
Onboarding. Oh well, I think onboarding is definitely super important. It's kind of like defining also, or like at least helps defining the length of the stay of the new employee with the team. So what is important in onboarding? My learning was to basically keep everything in one day, try to keep it short, short and sweet again, give a short intro to every single department for them to have an understanding. I think it's very important for the new employees to kind of get an idea of what's happening in every single department in the first day in order for them not to get the wrong opinion just learning by I don't know, like from different conversations, hearing a lot of different stories. So I think it's really good to focus in the first day on giving them a short introduction on every single department.
Within that, obviously, I know onboarding processes are vital. What tip would you give to people in your position that were looking at setting up onboarding processes and making that as good as possible? What tip would you give them?
I think that maybe it's going to sound weird, but I think an onboarding process is never going to be perfect. It depends actually on the stage the company is at the moment of the onboarding. But onboarding is a learning process, right? So you will always learn based on feedback and you will always improve. So no stress on that. You will improve, but you will just have to ask questions and make sure that you take the feedback into consideration, and then things will go well.
And I suppose, like you mentioned, you've probably got to adapt the onboarding process for each individual coming on, although there's going to be a structure. Everyone, like you mentioned, is different. I think one thing for me that's vital, I suppose, when onboarding somebody is probably looking at final stage interviews and who you've got there. But how many people do you think should be put forward to a final stage interview when you're considering this? Because obviously, if there's 10 people going for a role, you're not ideally going to have 10 people at a final stage. But how many do you think should make it through to that stage?
I think my opinion should never be more than 3 people.
Okay. Why would you say 3?
I think if you have more than 3 people in the final stage, it means that something went wrong with all the other stages. It means that the team is not really on the same page in terms of the skill set that you need to hire. And then, obviously, if you have more than 3, the decision making is going to be impossible to hire someone. The less you have, I think, the better. And it means that the team really understood the role. And they assess the right skill set, I would say. And I never had more than 3 people. Actually, most of the times I had 1 or 2 people in the final stage. So,
what you're saying is you've nailed the interview process, Adriana. You were playing quite cool throughout, but you just said you've nailed it.
Yes, I did. We worked hard on that. It was a huge improvement at Clue specifically. When I joined, there were more people in the final stage, but then slowly we improved a lot and we had 1 to 2 people in final stage. It was really good. Yeah.
And I suppose, like you say, you make the right hire, the onboarding becomes a lot easier as well because you know they're the perfect fit. I think me and Jesse were discussing this the other day as well because we're working with quite a few startups at the moment, and I suppose a hot topic right now is, I suppose, first hires, and specifically getting down to that final stage and the right people. But how would you actually define and choose a hiring strategy for first hires? Because there's a lot of things to consider, isn't there? Like employer branding, building an in-house returnal team, going for external help. So, what advice would you give?
Mm-hmm. So, first hires are very important. They basically define, how successful your business is going to be. So, spend some time in hiring the right people, and also don't be afraid to spend the money, right? Because if you just got your first like investment, that is going to help you to actually hire the right people to build a business. So yes, I would suggest them to not look at the money necessarily when they hire. Of course, there's limits, but just spend the money to hire the right people, and take a month of your time to actually hire the people to help you grow your business. And if you're at like seed investment, I think like you need to really have that growth mindset, right? Yeah.
And what would you say the best sort of way around this or methodology to it is? Is it sort of finding external help or doing it internally, or is it sort of case by case dependent on the company and their finances?
I think it really depends on the company and their finances for sure, and obviously what they have in mind, where the company is going to be, or where they want the company to be in 1 or 3 years, right? But I would say also, like, if you hiring HR initially isn't going to impact you negatively, and then it might actually have a positive impact on your future growth from early stage, right? Because they can focus on like on processes, on employer branding, and slowly this will save you money in the future. But again, if it's something that you're not really sure about, then you can also go, and if you want to basically grow steadily and not like super growth, then you can also go with like agencies. And also they can maybe opt for the solution that you guys are offering, for example the Impala embedded solution, if I recall correctly, where you basically just have someone that knows what basically they know how like hiring is done, and then they can help you hire much faster, and then you have a bit more time to decide if you want to hire internally or not, in like hire a talent acquisition internally or not.
Yeah,
I'll
no, I
give
think
you
that
£10 later, Adriana.
No, I think the development of those solutions is definitely an interesting sort of topic area. It's probably not too dissimilar to what you're currently doing, Adriana, at Cavalry, in terms of sort of almost being more on a consultancy basis and bringing that broader experience and applying it to a company based on its specific needs and requirements at that moment in time. But just to sort of wrap up, what would you say your top 3 tips for building an interview process would be?
Oh my gosh,
My favorite one, this one. Yeah, put you on the spot. I love it every week.
it's so hard to define. All right, give me a second. I think I think that if you want to have a good interview process, you need to have a prepared interviewing team. If your team doesn't know how to interview and what's important, then you're basically working for nothing. You're not going to hire anyone because they don't understand what they need. I think you need to focus on candidate experience. I think this is also very important because this is going to affect how people see you, and if they will want to work with you as well. And then making sure that you assess the most relevant skill set, as I said before, no matter the process, you will never be able to assess someone at its full potential unless you have hundreds of interviews or you actually work with that person for some days or weeks, right? So that's what I would say now, being put on the spot.
Give it a couple of days, you'll probably come back to us and be like, Joe, Jesse, I want to change my answers, but there we go.
Can I just?
Depends how good Jesse's editing skills will be. But I think it's been really insightful today, I think, for myself and Jesse, Adriana as well, when working with businesses. And I'm sure that, I suppose, people listening will think that we've definitely added value. So thank you very much for your time today. Obviously, obviously, guys listening, if we do have listeners, hopefully we do so. No, but I appreciate you guys listening. Obviously, we'll be back the next week or so with, inviting somebody else with another topic. But just, I suppose, really appreciate it, guys. Thank you very much.
Cheers, guys.